Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. What are we doing today? Today we're looking at the Crayola Educational Watercolors. Now, you saw me get this last year for Christmas, and today is D-Day. Well, today has to be D-Day because while I was rumbling through my watercolor sets, I noticed it started to grow a little fuzz, and so I cleaned it up. I cured it, and I said, you know what? Best thing I do my first impression of this today and then work with it so that if it decides to grow any more fuzz, because I did treat it. However, when you see stuff happen, you want to use it as soon as possible. So instead of treat it and leave it again, just let me work with it and see what it's all about. Now, I've never used these watercolors before, and it was in the green. The fuzz was in the green. And how I treated it, if you guys want to know, is I have a little concoction here, a little spray bottle that I usually keep in the dark. This spray bottle has in alcohol and clove oil, and it's a great treatment for watercolors that developed a bit of fuzz. Okay, so it's not uncommon for watercolors to develop a bit of fuzz, especially watercolor paints, semi-moist paints, which these are, to develop a bit of fuzz because, especially in my climate, I live in a tropical climate. It's very humid where I am. I keep it away from the sun in a cool, dark place. So yeah, fuzz like those conditions. Humid, cool, and dark. They love those conditions. So it's not uncommon for fuzz to develop. The important thing is for you to treat it. I know another watercolor paint I had before, this is a while ago, developed fuzz, and I had to treat it again. And what I did with that, I allowed it to dry in the sun completely. I know its nature was to be moist. I didn't want it to be moist. I let it dry completely, let it cracked, dried out completely, and that was how I was able to control the fuzz in that watercolor paint. But for this one, I just want to work with it for today, and we'll do the same thing we always do. Work with it a little bit. I'll give you my first impression of what I think of it, being that I've never used it before. It was something I am excited to use. Work with it and give you my first impression. Work with it for a couple weeks or two. I do have a few projects I usually work with these things on, and then bring it back to you probably tomorrow, maybe next week, when I finish go through the gamut of all the stuff I have designated to work with it on, and tell you what I fully think of these paints. Interesting little facts, I already put water in here. Interesting little facts about these is that I wonder if it's similar to these. These are the Crayola watercolor paints. It's the Binney and Smith Crayola watercolor paints that I got from eBay. These paints are vintage paints, and they're patented in 1950 for release in 1953. So these are I call it my 1953 paints because that was the year it was supposed to be released. The patent order went in 1950. So these are my vintage Crayola watercolor paints. So I'll be, feeling if they're similar to these, but these are really pigment-based paints. I remember when I read the patent information on these, which is free to read, by the way. I remember this is a alizarin crimson paint, so I know these were made from real pigments. Me thought of these when I got these was because of the packaging. I am used to my Crayola packaging looking like this, not like this with a hard plastic. So that's the reason why I thought of it. Okay. Another helpful hint: when your paint develop a bit of fuzz, always use a special brush. Don't use the paintbrush you normally use. Use paintbrush you don't normally use when that happens. But this paintbrush I'm using is actually the one that came in this set. So it's a brand new brush. So it should be okay. And the same thing I do, I take these brush away. I clean them with maybe a bit of bleach and put them to dry in the sun. So, yeah. Oh, I love that color. Even the paper I swatch on is one of my tests. Is one of my tests because this paper that I'm swatching on is the Fabriano Studio. This paper is 300 grams per meter square. Yeah, decent enough swatching paper for me at least. I don't think I want to speed through this because it's only 8 colors. I'm noticing something while swatching. There's a hair on this that is just distracting while swatching. So yeah, okay, that's much better. Plus you don't get to see the little tricks that I do in my, because I would normally, if I'm doing the time lapse, I would stop this and then do those little things like cut off straightaway hair or elongated hair, because that hair was extra long. And I actually forget sometimes to talk to you guys about it. It doesn't remind me of the 1953 paint. It actually reminds me of regular Crayola paint. It really does. That's interesting. The bristles on this brush is really stiff. Really stiff bristles. I'm barely touching the brush on the paper. I don't have like that. No, I'm not doing that. I'm just barely touching it because it's really stiff. It doesn't feel soft at all, but it is doing a good job at swatching. At least I have better control over this brush than I did this one. Okay. Blue. Okay, let me see if I could bring you guys up a bit, as I'm like scrunched down in the corner here. The blue. I went out the line. Okay, I'm just gonna do this one because I kind of went out the line a bit. So I'm gonna do this one here. Give the blue time to dry because kind of went out the line a bit. Okay. Okay, let's see if we could just catch it exact. Yeah, here we are. Okay, the colors are really, really bright. As you can see, I'm gonna put this off to the side so it can dry. That's my first impression of it. It's really bright. It does remind me of my Crayola washables, but somehow the inkiness of these paints feels very heavy. That's what I was thinking. It feels like heavy ink. So I'm going to put it off to the side to dry, and then I'm going to grab my book, this book here that you guys, I've talked about this book so many times here, and I'm going to do some tests with it, you know, some swatching, some tests, see how it works, and then I'm going to do an illustration with it, compare it to some other things, and then I'm going to bring those back to you in a future video. It might be tomorrow, it might be next week, but definitely I'll be working with these paints. And sorry for hitting the camera and telling you what my full perspective of the Crayola educational watercolor paints are all about. So See you in part 2. It will be probably a next day or 1 week for me, but definitely 2 seconds for you. Hi friends, welcome back to part 2 to our perspective review, if you must, of these Crayola Educational Watercolor set. And the reason I'm being very careful is because I already have water in them, as you noticed. Now let's first discuss the swatch. Now I swatched this out, as you know, on Fabriano Studio cold press 300 GSM or 140 pounds, and then I laminate it. And this is what happened when it went through the laminating machine. Yeah, they all smudged except for the black, but the red, the orange, the yellow, the green, the blue, the violet, and the brown all smudged when it went through the laminating machine. So, yeah. And then I did a few works with it. Like I said, first I worked with it in this book. Now this book is made from Canson mixed media paper. I believe this is a 200 GSM paper or 250, but it's a really thick surface, and this is how it came out. Now the fact that there's no even color laydown, it's not the fault of the paint, it's actually could be the fault of the paper, because I've had this paper since 2019, so I'm thinking maybe the sizing of this paper is weighing on me. And also I did it's right here. I did the test I did with it, and these are the layering tests. This is where I just put a dot and see how it spreads, and I did the same thing here. It didn't really spread a lot. I tried to lift it here after dry, and I tried to wet this box and then put some blue color in. It didn't spread a lot, and then I did some mixing. I did a little illustration. So you will get that it really doesn't, for me, it doesn't layer, but it does do optical mixing, which is pretty nice. And the colors, as you can see, is really transparent. They're not opaque at all. So yeah, this is where I was. And the final thing that I was working on it on was on this. Let me bring you guys up a bit. Was on this, and this is a painting that I did with this. This paper is Sargent Art watercolor paper. This paper is 300 GSM or 140 pounds. And I tried using this not only with the paints themselves, but also with the Crayola colored pencils. And you see where the glossiness is, that's where the Crayola color pencils was. And for the most part, the Crayola color pencils went flawlessly down on this. And it, unlike some other watercolor paints that I have, I was able to reline my work with a fine liner, and it didn't give me much trouble. So today, now that you know all this, we'll discuss more when I do my color up. I brought out this surface. Now this book, yes, it's the surface, is the Fluid 100% cotton, and I've chosen to use this book for my color session for these reviews because I need to finish it, guys. Let's be honest, I need to finish this. So here, I don't remember, I'm trying to remember what watercolor paints I used here. But yeah, these illustrations are actually, if you're a member of my Patreon, these illustrations are from 2021. Yes, these illustrations are from 2021, either October or November of 2021. These illustrations are there for you to download and color along if you like. And this is just me writing notes as usual, and some swatches. So I'm gonna choose I'm thinking this one. Yeah, let's just choose this one to do our color session with, and let me discuss with you during my color sessions the other amazing findings that I found with these paints. Okay, let's get this started. I These paints are definitely dye-based. I don't think these are their pigmented version to the Crayola washables, solely for the fact that it does feel like the Crayola washables, just a more thick, pasty version of the Crayola washables. I struggled with this paint initially with water controlled and with paste controlled. Water control, because the brush I'm using is a much softer brush. I do find for me it works well with a much softer brush, so I was using my Milan 311 versus the brush that it came with, which was really stiff, and water control was very difficult for me. And also paste control, because when I put water onto the paints become pasty, and so it wasn't a situation where I could have dipped the brush back into that, because I would have corrupted the entire paint. So I had to take the paint out and in order to control the pace of the paint. So I was really struggling with the paint control and paste controlled. The paints do work well on this cotton paper versus the other papers that I worked with it on, and it does work well with colored pencils. It worked okay with colored pencils and fine liners and alcohol based markers. We discussed before that it is not necessarily the fault of the paint for the uneven color laydown. It's more the fault of the paper, because they're probably very old and the sizing is probably leaving. I don't think we have discussed everything else with these paints. Guys, we have literally discussed everything with these paints. I did compare these paints to the 1953 one, but because the 1953 one was pigment based versus dye based, it's a much better paint consistency than these ones. I already treated the paints. I told you about that already. So guys, let me end this here, because there's really not much else left to discuss with these paints, and then I will catch you in the wrap up. So we're done. I'm sure you would have heard my thoughts on these paints. Well, more thoughts on these paints. I've already discussed a lot, and I just want to illustrate to you guys first what I meant when I said I was struggling with water control and paste control. Now here are the paints. They're wet. Let me bring out my palette here. And well, I don't need my book here right now. Put this to the side. Okay, and this is this is the amount of paints I use on my palette for this. Not a lot. So let's use a color you probably would see very nicely, probably the yellow. See what I mean? You see that? It's very pasty. Yeah. And then when you put that in your palette, yeah, it becomes very pasty, and I guess this is what makes it cause it to be glossy. But let's say I add water to that. Now this is a consistency I need to work with, so I don't have that sticky glossy effect. I think that's what happens here, because I like to make my, you're not seeing what I'm doing here, because I like to make my swatches in mass tones with the thickest amount of paint that can be tolerated, and maybe it just melted. But yeah, that's what I meant when I said I was struggling with water control and paste control. As you can see, you see the pastiness in the palette. Yeah, and I was struggling with that, because there's a consistency, there's a sweet spot I need to reach to, sorry to hit the camera, for these paints, for me to effectively paint with them without feeling that it'll become glossy or sticky when it dries. And that's what I meant when I say water control and paste control, because I was working with my Milan 311 brush, which is a brush I'm well familiar with, but because of the paste control, you know, the amount of water that needs to be in the brush has to be limited compared to the amount of water that I'm normally painted with these brushes. So in the color up to, you probably will see me siphon off or dapping off some of the water out of these brushes, out of this brush particularly, a lot. And this was the brush basically I used for this painting here. Yeah, this was the brush I used, the only brush I used. because my other brush is no longer good, so I have to put that in the brush graveyard. But yeah, but I did have a lot of fun. I'm used to working with these paints, so for me it is a lot of fun. I enjoy the process. I just have to adjust when it comes to that pace control issue that I have with these paints. But all in all, it's a lot of fun. Have you guys ever used these Crayola Educational before? What is your impression of it? What do you think of it? Let me know all those beautiful goodness in the comments below. And as usual, guys, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. And please stay safe, stay blessed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.